You know, our modern, interconnected world, it didn't just happen. It certainly didn't happen overnight. It was all kickstarted by just a handful of technological breakthroughs. These inventions allowed a few nations to sail right over the horizon, and in doing so, they literally redrew the map of the world forever.
So that brings us to the big question we're going to tackle. How did a few key innovations, and here's a spoiler, many of them were borrowed and perfected, how did they let Europeans cross these massive oceans and connect the entire world for the very first time? All right, let's dive in.
Okay, so the time period we're really zeroing in on is this pivotal 300-year window, right between 1450 and 1750. I mean, this was an era of just explosive change. It's defined by these incredible voyages. You're thinking Columbus, da Gama, and the rise of huge empires that, for the first time ever, spanned entire oceans.
All right, here's the game plan. First, we'll look at why they even wanted to go on these voyages. Then, we'll get into the actual tools that made it all possible. After that, we'll see the new kinds of empires that popped up, the global economy that they built, and finally, we'll unpack the huge, lasting consequences of it all.
So let's start with Section 1, a rush for new routes. I mean, what on earth was so important that it would push people to sail out into what was, for them, a vast, terrifying, and completely unknown ocean? Well, in a word, money. The main goal was wealth. See, for centuries, Europe was basically at the end of the line for the Silk Road. All those amazing goods from Asia, spices, silk, tea, they were incredibly valuable. But the problem was, the overland routes were long, they were dangerous, and they were controlled by rivals. The big dream was to find a direct sea route to Asia and just cut out all the middlemen.
But, it wasn't just about economics. There was a lot more going on. Back in Europe, populations were booming, which created a ton of pressure for land and for jobs. And then you had these laws, primogeniture, which basically meant only the oldest son inherited everything. So if you were a younger son, you had to go make your own fortune somewhere else. And for some people, it was simpler, a personal quest for adventure or the search for a place where they could practice their religion in peace.
Okay, so the motivation was there big time, but the actual ability to do it, not so much. Not yet, anyway. That required a whole new set of tools. And the story of this navigator's toolkit is what's really fascinating. It's a story of cross-cultural innovation. And this is a really crucial point. Europeans didn't invent all this technology from scratch, not even close. Their real genius was in taking, combining, and improving on innovations from all over the known world, from Africa, Asia, the Middle East. You could say they became master adapters. Let's take the magnetic compass, for example. It was originally a Chinese invention, and this simple device was an absolute game changer. For the first time ever, sailors could figure out which way they were going, even when they were totally out of sight of land, or when the sky was cloudy, or in the middle of the night. It completely took the guesswork out of navigation.
All right, then you have the astrolabe. This was a technology that was really perfected by Muslim navigators and astronomers. And with it, sailors could figure out their latitude, basically their north-south position, just by measuring the stars. So suddenly it wasn't just about knowing your direction, you could actually start to pinpoint where you were on this vast, empty ocean, a huge leap forward.
And maybe the final piece of the puzzle was the ship itself, and specifically the sail. European shipbuilders adopted this triangular sail, the lateen sail, from Arab sailors. Now, unlike the old square sails, this one allowed a ship to sail against the wind. Think about that. That's a totally revolutionary idea, and it's what made long-distance, reliable sea travel finally possible.
So when you put all of this new tech together, you get a super fast evolution in ship design. Ships started getting really specialized. Just look at the Portuguese carrack. It's this big, beefy vessel built for trade. But then, look at their Carvel. It's half the size. It was built for speed and long-distance exploration. And by the time the Dutch came along with the fluid, the design was stripped down to be almost nothing but a floating cargo container, all to maximize profit. Each ship was becoming a purpose-built tool for this new global age. And with these incredible new tools, European nations didn't just explore. They started to dominate. And that brings us right to our third section, empires on the water and the rise of a completely new kind of global power.
So you have nations like Portugal, Spain, Great Britain, France, and Holland really leading the charge. But here's the thing. These weren't your traditional empires built by conquering huge chunks of land. No, historians call them trading post empires. Their power came from controlling key ports and strategic sea lands. Essentially, power was projected right from the deck of a ship.
And if you control the seas, well, you control global trade.
This led directly to something the world had never, ever seen before, which is the focus of our fourth section, the first global economy. I mean, for the very first time, you have goods, wealth, and people moving between all the continents on a massive scale. You had cash crops like sugar and tobacco flowing from the Americas. From Asia, you had all the luxury goods Europe had wanted for so long. And from Africa came the horrific trade in enslaved people, forced to work on plantations in the Americas. This was the birth of a truly global and deeply complicated network of exchange.
And we can't forget that this new global trade was built on a foundation of immense violence. The philosopher Voltaire put it pretty starkly back in 1756. He said that the quest for spices was basically enforced with gunpowder. The incredible profits of this new economy, they were extracted through force, through coercion, and through a lot of bloodshed.
And that violence was just one part of the profound, world-altering consequences that came from connecting the Eastern and Western hemispheres for the first time. So let's talk about the lasting impact of it all.
Probably the single most profound consequence is what we now call the Columbian Exchange. This was just a massive biological transfer of plants, animals, and crucially diseases. So you had foods from the Americas, like potatoes and corn, being brought to Europe, Africa, and Asia, and they fueled a huge population boom over there. But the exchange went the other way too, and with absolutely catastrophic results. European diseases like smallpox and measles were introduced to the Americas, where the indigenous populations had no natural immunity. It devastated them, causing one of the greatest demographic collapses in all of human history.
And that really leaves us with a final thought to chew on. Think about it. The economic systems we have, the political boundaries on a map, the very food on your plate, the languages people speak all over the world, all of it, in some way, is a direct result of these first global connections forged by just a handful of innovations 500 years ago. And it makes you wonder, right? How do those connections, made so long ago, still shape and define the world we're all living in today?